All right, everybody, it's 9:30. Let's get started. So find a seat and wrap up your conversations. Even if you're important, please wrap up. Okay, so today we will finish at least most of Chapter 11. Maybe 10 minutes of material left for Tuesday, but certainly most of it will finish today. As I mentioned last class, on Tuesday we will have a quick kind of review game. So I posted on Course Questions a little place to sign up. The way you'll sign up is just by commenting, saying, oh, I want to play, or whatever, that's good enough. So unfortunately, given this is a very large class, most of you will not get to play. There will be eight people who get to play. They'll be randomly chosen at the beginning of class, and only one person will win. And the winner will get 1% bonus in the class, so a little bit of incentive. Now, the downside, there's two downsides. One is you'll be competing in front of everyone, and everyone will see if you know your stuff or not. An additional downside, there's a small chance of minor finger injuries. Very small, but I've done this game with like kids when I used to teach like reading, writing classes. Just like minor finger bruising, but so there's a little bit of suspense, I suppose. But so comment on that by 5 p.m. tonight. At 5 p.m. tonight, I will take the names, put them on a list, and on Tuesday, I'll just do it on the computer. There's a random number generator, and I'll use it to randomly pick 8 people. So that should only take like 10 minutes, but a little bit of a fun way to review. Okay. An additional piece of housekeeping. So many of you, all of you, should have gotten the email from SPOT, S-P-O-T, for the final review of the course. It's recommended that we take some class time for this. So at the end of class today, I will leave early. You all can stay here and complete the SPOT review on your laptop or computer. As I said, wait till I leave before you do that, but we'll have the last 10, 15 minutes of class time to do that. Okay, please wrap up your conversations, even if you're special. Okay, a few things I wanted to add last class. So I sometimes listen to my lectures to see if I missed something or if I made a mistake. One thing that's not really a mistake that's relevant to you guys, but in case my family listens to these, I should say my brother did lose the weight. The one who I, poked a little bit of fun at, but not poked fun, that's not the right term. But he actually recently did his first full marathon, and 3.5 hours for a first, so quite good. So he's in better shape than me now, as it turns out. I also forgot to say a little bit about the section on thinness and attractiveness. So as I mentioned, the extent to which thinness is attractive is very varied across cultures. But I mentioned that there are some things that appear to be universal, namely for males, wider shoulders than waist, and for females, wider hips than waist. And the standard view as to why that is that having a wider shoulder to waist ratio is an indicator of strength and competence. And for females, having hips wider than the waist indicates greater ease giving birth, which in the ancestral environment would have been important because there were no doctors to help. So, and there's studies bearing that out, that it is correlated with that. Another thing, so we ended last class with that funny finding that during different stages of the cycle, women are attracted to different types of men. So as I say, I listened to my lectures and sometimes try to see if I made a mistake. The last time I looked into that, there was a meta-analysis. So quick reminder that, actually, can anyone tell me what a meta-analysis is? This is from a while ago, but cumulative final is coming up. So can anyone tell me what a meta-analysis is? Yeah.
When findings from studies in the same topic are grouped together to find that.
Exactly. You take all the studies on a given topic and group them together. And there was a meta-analysis like 10 years ago that found evidence for this, but I looked up. Apparently there is a more recent meta-analysis that did not find it. So either the effect is small or it may not be there. And I decided to mention this because, we're wrapping up the book, and one really important thing that I want to instill in you all is skepticism, right? That thing we talked about in chapter 2. Psychology is very much a work in progress. I mean, all science is, but psychology especially. So don't take what I say on faith. Don't take what the book says on faith. Always be skeptical. Always be asking, what's the evidence, and so on. Science is not just about a body of facts. It's really primarily about a method, a way of thinking about the world. And skepticism is integral to that way of thinking. And one other small mistake I made. I listened to it, and at one point I said the hypothalamus creates long-term memories. I obviously meant the hippocampus, so hopefully that didn't throw any of you off. The hippocampus, that's the memory one. Okay, that's all the housekeeping I have. So let's get back into the chapter. So we finished near the end of the discussion of the organizational and activational effects of sex hormones, where organizational effects have to do with how hormones shape the human body and the human brain, especially in the womb. And activational effects have to do with day-to-day effects on behavior, psychology, and so on. The book mentions that in the case of sexual desire, androgens, like testosterone, apparently play a role in both males and females. So that's interesting to know, because both males and females have testosterone. Males just have more of it. The book goes on to talk about some interesting kind of polling data. They've asked people a simple question, how often do you think about sex? And 1 in 5 women say they think about sex every day, whereas half of men say they think about sex every day. The other half lie. No. Okay, so there's a little discussion of that. I didn't put any terms in the key terms about sexual dysfunction. The book has a discussion of many that you probably have heard of. Various injuries or drugs that you use can lead to various problems in sexual functioning, but also psychological issues can. Right? If you have performance anxiety or if you have a history of sexual assault, that can disrupt ordinary sexual functioning, unfortunately. There is also a discussion of pornography, and in particular, the controversy about whether pornography has negative effects, particularly in the area of violence against women. And there's 2 competing theories of this. One is catharsis, and one is social learning theory. So these make quite different predictions about what the effect should be. So social learning theory is essentially synonymous with observational learning, like we talked about back in chapter 7. So when you watch people do things, you become more likely to do them yourself. So in the case of pornography, especially violent pornography, someone who holds this view would predict that pornography would increase the risk of violence against women, because whatever you watch, you are then more likely to do it yourself. Catharsis theory is an idea that goes back to our good friend Mr. Freud, or Dr. Freud, I guess. And the idea here is that we have inborn aggressive tendencies, and what we are looking for is an outlet, some place to kind of let out our aggressive tendencies. And if the opportunity for that release is provided, that will decrease our aggressive tendencies. So that's what catharsis means, like letting out the tension. So according to this theory, watching violent pornography could potentially decrease violence against women because you have an outlet for it. The book has a discussion, so those are the theories, right? So these theories make different predictions. In the case of non-violent pornography, the book indicates that the evidence is more ambiguous. But in the case of violent pornography, the book indicates that the weight of the evidence is that it can have negative effects related to violence against women or to taking women seriously. That's what the state of the evidence is vis-a-vis that. But the main thing to know is what the difference is between these two theories. Okay. Any questions about those two terms? Okay, next, as promised, the book has a discussion of sexual orientation. So this was relatively neglected in the discussion of sexuality in chapter 4, but the book has a fairly lengthy discussion of different possible causes of sexual orientation, and we'll go through them, and I'll actually add some that I know from my own research. So start with some basic facts. According to the book, around 2% of males are homosexual, so exclusively attracted to other males. And a little over 1% of females consider themselves to be lesbian, exclusively attracted to females. Then it's almost the opposite. Around 2% of women consider themselves bisexual, and around 1% of males. So women are more likely to be bisexual than exclusively lesbian, and vice versa for males. But if you broaden the question out, you get somewhat higher numbers. So 13% of women and under 2% of men say that they are heterosexual, but that they are at least sometimes attracted to members of the same sex. So maybe like a little bi-curious, as we would say nowadays. Interestingly, there are far more females in that category. And this is consistent with a large body of evidence that women are more flexible in what they are attracted to. Men are more likely to be either gay or straight, and women are more likely to be, in the middle. I mentioned this to my mom once, and she said, "Look, I'm not attracted to women at all, but I get it. Women are obviously better looking than men. Men are beasts." So there's that. And they even did a study once where they did an eye tracking study. So they would show self-identified straight men and women pictures of attractive couples, so an attractive man and an attractive woman, and then they looked at where their eyes moved. And men who were straight just looked at the lady. Women who said they were straight looked more equally at both. Their eyes kind of went back and forth, so kind of an interesting finding. So those are kind of the facts, kind of the empirical facts. But then the question is, why? Why does sexual orientation exist? Or why do differences in sexual orientation exist? Why is anyone attracted to members of the same sex? It's not especially mysterious why opposite sex attraction would exist. If you look at things through an evolutionary lens, there's a pretty obvious function. But when it comes to homosexual attraction, it's less clear. But there are a few different theories that have been put forward. And these are independent of the moral question of whether it's permissible. So personally, if you're not hurting anybody, I don't give a shit. Do whatever you like. But these questions are descriptive questions. They're about how do the tendencies emerge? Why did they evolve? And one view, which I'll jokingly call the gay uncle theory, it has different names in the literature, but the view here is that it relates to something called kin selection, which we talked about in chapter 4. And the basic idea here is that it's theoretically possible that genes which predispose you to have same-sex attraction also predispose you to invest more in your relatives, like say your nieces and nephews. And if it confers enough of an advantage to them, like they have someone looking out for them and investing in them, theoretically the genes which predispose people to at least sometimes being homosexual could be passed on. And actually I have a video of a biologist discussing this theoretical possibility. This is Richard Dawkins, who's a very important evolutionary biologist. He calls it the worker bee hypothesis. There's different names for it. So we'll watch that, and then we'll come back and discuss one other evolutionary theory. Okay, he goes into some other possibilities, but that's a good description of the question and one possible answer. So as he said there in the video, I forgot to mention this, there is strong evidence that homosexuality is partly heritable, right? Based on the kinds of twin studies that we talked about in chapter 4 as well. Monozygotic twins are more similar in terms of their sexual orientation than dizygotic twins, which is good evidence of a genetic component. So one line of evidence that may be considered consistent with this is the more older brothers a male has, the more likely he is to be gay. And someone who's operating from this theory could say maybe that's because something gets activated wherein they know there will be nieces and nephews for them to look after, and that could trigger it. Funny enough, this effect only occurs if you're right-handed. So I have no idea what to do with that. And I double-checked this morning. There was a recent meta-analysis, since I was caught off guard last time, and this is confirmed. The most recent meta-analysis, lots of studies, the more older brothers a male has, the more likely the brother is to be gay if the brother is right-handed. However, there's a deep problem with this hypothesis, which is it leads to a prediction, and this prediction appears to not be confirmed. I mean, can anyone tell me, what's the prediction? If this theory is right, what should we observe to be true about gay men?
Should they have more older brothers?
That's one, but there's another one. Yeah.
They're right-handed and have older brothers?
Or not that, I should say, the one about like the worker bee or the gay uncle, like the idea that homosexuality gets selected for because they preferentially invest in nieces and nephews.
They don't want to have them.
Close. The prediction is they should, like last attempt.
They have more older brothers, but they're attracted to men, so kind of contradictory to the natural selection.
No. So the prediction is that gay men should invest more in nieces and nephews than straight men should, right? Because that's the idea. The idea is this trait got selected for because genes which predispose men to be gay also predispose them to help out more with extended family members. That prediction appears to not be confirmed, which is a problem. So that counts strongly against this idea. So one other idea, it's sometimes called the sexual antagonism hypothesis, but I'll just call it the female relatives hypothesis. So think about the X chromosome, which is a gene that gets passed on. Women have 2 and men have 1. Any genetic variants on the X chromosome which predispose women to being more attracted to men or more wanting to have more kids could be selected for. And it's twice as likely to wind up in the body of a female than in the body of a male. But that means that some men may get that gene and it may predispose them to being attracted to men, but as long as the reproductive benefit it confers on the women that have it is greater, then the gene can still be selected for it. And there in fact is such a gene on the X chromosome, XQ28. This is not the gay gene. This doesn't explain all of it, but it seems to be associated with some of the variants in homosexual attraction. And crucially, when you look at male homosexuals, their female relatives, on average, have more kids. So this is another possible mechanism by which some of the variation in homosexuality could be explained. To explain this theory a bit more is Steven Pinker in a discussion. So we'll watch that, and then we'll wrap up the discussion of evolutionary explanations and move on to some other causes. Yes?
Is it possible that it might not be able to be confirmed just solely on the fact that now gay people are able to have kids of their own? So maybe they can't, they're not maybe focused on that same thing, looking after their relatives' kids, because of the fact that through the different ways they
Good.
have their own kids.
That's good pushback. So one way to test the prediction maybe more effectively would be to look at traditional societies. So there are still some hunter-gatherer societies around where modern technology doesn't change things as much, so it would be maybe more kind of ecologically valid to test the prediction in that context. I think there actually was one such study, but I don't remember what it found. So, okay, so we'll watch this Steven Pinker video. Okay, so well said by Steven. The only other thing I have to say about these evolutionary theories is I know of a study where they tested this one. I forget what the results were on this one, but where they tested it in a more traditional society, namely Samoa. And there's a group of people there called the, I want to make sure I spell this right, the Fa'afafine, which in their language means in the manner of a woman. So these are males who kind of take on female roles in the society and are usually attracted to other men. And they tested this theory with them to see, are the female relatives of Fa'afafine more fertile? Are they more into guys, and do they have more kids? And the prediction is confirmed there too. Yes?
I just wanted to say about like the number of folks who are like either gay or lesbian or bisexual. There's got to be some studies out there that are about like the effects of toxic masculinity and patriarchy. Because there's a lot of stigma about, for example, for men, like coming out as bi, there's a lot of stigma.
Biphobia, or biracial, I've heard that too.
Yeah,
yes.
Especially for men. So the numbers have got to be higher.
That's a good point. So one thing you could say is that the reason that more women are willing to identify as bisexual is that there is less stigma against bisexual women compared to bisexual or even gay men for that matter. I'm sure that's a variable. I mean, you've all grown up in North America, so you've seen that, yes, women being together is not as frowned upon or made fun of as men being together. So I'm sure that's a variable as well. Okay, any questions about the evolutionary theories? Yes?
This is just for a build on it. So, like, you go through all the studies. Have they done, like, an appreciable amount of studies on, like, women?
On what, sorry?
Well, with all the studies you mentioned, they were all focused on, like men who were attracted to other men. I was wondering if the same findings would count as similar studies were done.
Yeah, so one thing, now here I am going a bit more out on a limb. There has been more research into specifically the evolutionary basis of male homosexuality, and I suspect that part of the reason for that is that, part of the function of sexual attraction is pair bonding, like getting close and being able to raise kids together, and women who pair bond, like let's say they become sexually and romantically intertwined and stay together, they can still have kids, maybe with a guy, it doesn't take much to get pregnant, and then raise the kid together. So it's not as hard to imagine an evolutionary story in which something like that would happen, whereas with two men being together, that's not the case. So now I'm going out a bit on a limb there. That's one possible reason why there's been more research into it, but it could also just be whatever. People decide to study things for their own biases or their own reasons. But yes.
Could you just explain again what kinsection?
Okay. Oh, sorry. This is two words. I should have added space. Kin selection. This is a word back from chapter 4. The idea of kin selection is that traits that make you better at helping your relatives can get passed on. So traits like paternal care, like caring for your kids, caring for your siblings, those are all traits that can get passed on because your family members share your genes. And the idea here was that genes which predispose men to be gay also predispose them to help out with their nieces and nephews, which allows for the trait to get passed on. Yes?
In my high school psychology class, I remember reading an article, and it said that in the womb of a mother, if there is higher levels of testosterone, it may influence, I think it was the amygdala. Is this
Yes,
still true?
we'll talk about that next. Yeah, I think it's the hypothalamus, but yes, we'll talk about that next. So we'll talk next about possible neurological and hormonal influences, but this is just the evolutionary stuff. Any other questions about this? Thumbs up for the evolutionary models? Okay. So actually, I'll go straight to this person's question then. So we talked last time about the 2D, 4D digit ratio, so how much longer your ring finger is than your pointer finger, which, as I said last class, is a proxy for how much testosterone you were exposed to in the womb. So for women, they are usually more equal, and for males, usually the ring finger is longer. And this is, as I say, correlated with prenatal testosterone. So there's an obvious question to ask, which is, do gay men and gay women have hormone profiles that are more kind of intermediate, like not quite like the average man, but not quite like the average woman? And I'll just say, on that front, the studies are a complete mess. You can find some studies finding that, as you may intuitively expect, that gay men have lower prenatal testosterone than heterosexual males. I vaguely remember seeing some studies where they have more, which would be interesting, and some that find no effect. So that area is a mess. It's conceivable that it could be a mechanism, but I have no confidence in the studies that exist so far. One theory that doesn't directly relate to, well, hormones are a possible mechanism here, but there was a study of a specific part of the hypothalamus. There's a specific set of nuclei, I forget what they're called, but that are directly related to sexual behavior, and they are highly sexually dimorphic. So very different in size between males and females, a specific region of the hypothalamus. And there was one study that found that male homosexuals, and I think lesbians too, I think they studied both, were more intermediate, not quite like the average for straight females or straight males, which would make sense. It's funny, one time I was teaching a class, and I talked about the digit ratio, like the finger ratio, and one guy looked at me and was like, wait, does this mean I'm gay? Like, do you like men? No. I'm like, how could looking at your fingers give you any more information than that? But anyways. Okay, the last thing I'll mention, this is kind of a crazy view. There's a psychologist named Daryl Bem. This relates to something that the book talks about. Daryl Bem is kind of like Freud. He's kind of a crazy genius. Has a lot of interesting ideas. But I would say a little crazy. His idea is that exotic becomes erotic. Basically, the brain's default is whichever sex seems more weird to you, that's the one you become attracted to. So when you're growing up as a kid, you're, oh, girls, I don't get this. They're so weird, man, Then once you hit puberty, that's who you become attracted to. Whereas if you think, I don't get the boys, man, they're just so different, then that's what you become attracted to. And the reason for him putting this idea forward is that there is a correlation between sex atypical behavior in childhood and becoming gay or bisexual. So being a so-called tomboy or being a boy who spends more time with girls as a youth is correlated with becoming gay later. Now, not perfectly. In fact, most people who start off as gender atypical, like tomboys or boys that hang out more with girls, most of them do grow up to be straight, but they are more likely than average to turn out gay. And so Bem put forward this idea as a result. A little bit crazy, a little bit speculative. The only piece of evidence I have is one anecdote. So I mentioned this to my gay friend, and I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And he was like, that makes perfect sense. When I was in elementary school, I couldn't even understand that males were in the same species as me. So there's one anecdote, but anecdotes don't prove anything. So, okay, that's all I have to say about that section. Any last questions about this? Okay. Next is achievement motivation. So don't have too much to say about this. So achievement motivation is exactly what it sounds like. It's the motivation to become successful and skilled at something, kind of to rise to the top. The book distinguishes between two types of achievement motivation: mastery motivation and performance motivation. Where performance is about doing better than the other people. It's about beating them, kind of becoming dominant and outperforming them. Whereas, mastery is about just kind of becoming better for an audience of one, right? Just kind of becoming better for its own sake, not necessarily comparing yourself to others. Another distinction, and this will come up actually later in another context, is approach versus avoidance motivation. This can relate to success, but it can also relate to other topics. This is one way of dividing up emotions and motivations that is very popular in biology. It's similar to the distinction between positive emotion and negative emotion, but it's more simple to operationalize. An approach motivation means you're moving towards something. So most positive emotions are like this, although not all of them. So if an animal wants something, it wants food or a mate or whatever, it moves towards it. You then characterize that state as a approach state or approach motivation. Whereas things like fear, where you're moving away from something, that's avoidance motivation. So some odd cases would be like anger. Anger we would normally think of as a negative emotion, but in terms of this classification, it's going to be approach, right? Because you want to move towards someone and beat them up. So the division's a little bit different for that reason. In the context of achievement motivation, approach motivation would be like, you want to be the best or beat others or whatever. Avoidance would be something like you want to avoid failure, right? Kind of fear of failure. And last thing I have to say about achievement motivation, as I say, I don't have too much to say about it. The book talks about how individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures tend to construe success differently. Oh, yes?
Is approach and avoidance correlated with the mastery and performance, or is it just
No, it's totally different. I mean, the book does have a 2x2 table for ways to combine them. I'm going to say don't worry about that. So yeah, there's no connection between this and this. So as I was saying, though, there is a difference between how individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures tend to construe achievement. Individualistic cultures tend to construe it in terms of your success, your individual uniqueness, achieving your or realizing your unique abilities, whereas collectivistic cultures tend to emphasize living up to group norms and group expectations. Not very surprising. Okay, so back to these two, though, these bottom two. Like I said, they're in another section. They relate to different types of conflict, different types of motivational conflict. And I'll explain these with a really simple toy example. So suppose your parents kick you out of the house for the night. I'm sure it would happen to none of you, but pretend you're a bad kid, you get kicked out for the night. But conveniently, there are two parties that you could go to spend the night at. Party A and Party B. And you have to choose one. You have to go to somewhere, because unless you want to sleep on the streets, which in Edmonton means that you die. And so then the question is, do you like these parties? I should have left myself more room, but whatever. So we'll say check means yes, you like it. X means no, you don't like it. Same here. So if you don't like party B, but you do like party A, well then there's no motivational conflict. You just go to party A. Pretty simple. If you do like party B and don't like party A, you go to party B. Simple. If you like both, you know, like one has your crush and one has your best friend, oh, which party should I go to? That's an approach conflict. And if you dislike both of them, so party A has your ex and party B has your enemy, I don't know, whatever, then you have an avoidance motivation. Because you have to go to one, you got to stay somewhere for the night. Or sorry, avoidance conflict. And then lastly, an approach avoidance conflict means you like and dislike the same thing. So say there's just one party, and you could go or you could not go, it's totally up to you, but you like and dislike different aspects of it. So that would be an approach avoidance conflict. Pretty simple. Any questions about that? Nothing too fancy. And then the last term for the motivation section before we finish with emotions is delayed discounting, which refers to the fact that we are less motivated by future rewards than present rewards. This will be thoroughly unsurprising. This is why procrastination is easy to do. This is why we have Social Security or in Canada, the pension plan or whatever, for old people, because rewards far off into the future we are not as motivated by. So if the choice is between spending money now on a nice vacation and saving up and investing for retirement, very hard to be motivated by future rewards. We kind of discount good things that will happen in the future. Okay, so that wraps up motivation. So we'll now move on to emotions. So as I said at the beginning of the chapter, both the words motivation and emotion, both of them relate to the Latin root to move. They are both about ways in which we are moved by these states. One difference with emotions is that they are defined in terms of positive and negative valence, so pleasant or unpleasant, and some other features. It's controversial kind of how much to build into the concept of emotion. Towards the end of the chapter, we'll be saying more about that. But a core feature of them is that they do have this kind of positive and negative valence. Now, if you're like me and you spent time in philosophy, it's kind of easy to get the idea that, well, these emotions are useless. Why couldn't we just be like purely rational, like Spock from Star Trek or something? But in fact, if you think about it carefully, that would in fact not be good. Logic and reason can never motivate you to do anything. It's just a kind of computing technique. There's a quote from the philosopher David Hume, who's one of my favorites, which is kind of shocking at first, but when you think about it, it kind of has to be true, which is, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. One way of translating that is, logic and reason are always in service of a goal. And what your goal is depends on what you want, what you care about, what your emotions are. Reason can't tell you what the goal is. Reason can only tell you how to get that goal. What you want or what you're motivated to get, that's a matter of what you feel or care about or whatever. So emotions are very important for that reason. So as I say, there's some controversy about how much to bake into emotions, but probably the most common view now is that emotions are what my professor called multi-componential, which is a fancy word that just means they have multiple components. It's not just one thing. There's kind of multiple features of what we standardly think of as emotions. So one feature is the eliciting stimuli. So that's just the thing in the environment that prompts the emotion or causes the emotion. I'm taking this straight from the book. Or, I guess I don't need the blocks. But the next is cognitive appraisal, which is your interpretation of that stimuli. There are physiological reactions that occur. So like fast heart rate, tears in your eyes, or whatever. There are expressive behaviors, which is behaviors that are designed to communicate your emotions to other people. So actually, tears in your eyes might be a better example of that. Physiological responses are things like, what's going on in your body, like your heart rate, your galvanic skin response, and stuff like that. Expressive behaviors, the big one here, of course, is facial expressions. We communicate a lot of our emotions in our face. And we'll be talking a lot about that when we get to Paul Ekman. And then lastly, instrumental behaviors. So as I said, emotions motivate us to do things, right? They move us, and they give us kind of goals that we want to achieve. And instrumental behaviors are ones that are aimed at that goal. So if you're scared, running away from something would be an instrumental behavior. The fear motivates you to avoid the dangerous thing, and so an instrumental behavior would be running away. Or if you're really mad at someone and you yell at them or you hit them or something, which I would not recommend, but that would be an example of an instrumental behavior. It's a behavior that's meant to achieve some kind of end. I'll stick with fear. So for eliciting stimuli, it would be whatever's in the environment that scared you, right? The tiger or the test, whatever. The stimuli in the environment that creates the emotion. The cognitive appraisal would be, you look at the tiger or the bear and you're like, oh, that's dangerous. You believe that it's a dangerous thing. Then that'll lead to your heart rate going up, you'll sweat, your sympathetic nervous system will activate, there are various changes that will occur in your body, which you become aware of. And expressive behavior would be, the scared face, right? Your eyebrows go up, your eyes get big, you might scream. Those would all be expressive. And instrumental behavior would be running away. Any questions about these components of emotion? Okay. Next, there's a discussion of the neuroscience of emotion, different brain areas, and many of them will not be surprising to you. So, actually, do I have a picture of these? Okay. I'll have to draw it. So, for the interpretation part, a big player, of course, is going to be the cortex, right? The outside, bumpy part of the brain, which is involved in complex processing and analysis. So more conscious appraisal of the stimuli would be going on there. The amygdala. Very important, especially for negative emotions like fear and aggression. It's like here-ish. The hypothalamus, important for different things where hormones and other kind of basic motivations are involved. So like love, for example, the hypothalamus is going to play a role. The nucleus accumbens. Does anyone remember what this one's involved in? What kinds of emotions will this one help to stimulate?
Reward.
reward. So like happiness, joy, pleasure. The nucleus accumbens sends dopamine everywhere, so it's important for that. And then lastly, one that the book talks about is the thalamus, which might seem like an unusual one. So remember that the thalamus's job is to receive sensory information from the senses, except for smell, and then redirect that sensory information to the cortex. However, a neuroscientist named Ledoux discovered a functionally important connection with the amygdala. And the idea here is that you can have unconscious emotional reactions kind of very quickly to something. His idea is that the thalamus is pretty dumb, but it can analyze some basic sensory features. There's some evidence, for example, I forget the details of the study, but the thalamus can tell whether something is a snake-like thing, for example. And so it's possible to become kind of instinctively afraid of something even before it's made to the cortex for more complex analysis. So you can have, for example, a kind of fear reaction occur even before you've really worked out in detail what it is. So that's a possible basis for various unconscious automatic emotional reactions. One other one I'll mention, you may see it in future classes, but you will not be tested on it, is the insula, the insular cortex. For many emotions, it's tough to nail down one part of the brain that's exclusively deals with it. So even the amygdala, I said, okay, the amygdala is fear and aggression. Even that's kind of loose. It's involved in some other emotions too. The tightest link between one emotion and one brain area is the link between the insula and disgust. That link is quite strong. Disgust reactions seem to be quite closely tied with it. So you'll see that if you go on to neuroscience courses. One other cool finding about that, they did a study, there's not many studies on this, but scanning brains of people while they indicate whether they believe or don't believe something. So you give them a bunch of statements, and they have to say like whether they believe it or not. Interesting finding, the insula lights up when you say you don't believe something. It's almost like you're intellectually disgusted by it. You're like, no, I reject this. Bit of a goofy way of putting it, but it could be that disgust is a more evolutionarily rudimentary capacity, and because we are a cognitive species, it's been partly revamped to be about beliefs. A little bit of a speculative interpretation of it, but interesting finding. Any questions about the different brain regions here?
So like the thalamus would be involved with like if you were scared, say like your little brother, like what? Ah.
Yes. Yeah, probably the midbrain too, but yes, that's a good example. Other questions? Last thing about the neuroscience, this is something that my lab actually does some work on. The book has a discussion of left-right frontal asymmetry. So this is studied most widely with EEG. So you can measure the extent to which the left and right hemisphere are active during a task while you're measuring it with EEG. And there's quite a bit of evidence that if the left hemisphere is more active than the right, you are more happy and approach motivated. You have stronger approach emotions or motivations. If the right hemisphere is more active, more sad, more withdrawn, and more avoidance motivation oriented. Yep.
Is this somehow related
To
to memory?
memory?
Yeah, because we did say that like more when you're sad, you want to
I don't think it would be, just because the left and right frontal cortex aren't super important for memory consolidation. I mean, some of them will be, especially for like long-term memory. So I doubt that's why, but conceivable there could be a connection. Yeah.
So it says people with more like frontal activation and left and right experience positive or negative emotions. Is this something
So I don't know. So it's definitely true that happiness has a strong genetic component, at least self-reported happiness. I believe it's something like 50% heritable. I mean, that's usually a good bet. But I think specifically in the case of happiness, that is the average amount of heritability. Now, whether that's mediated by this left-right frontal asymmetry, I don't know. I mean, it could result from the environmental bit. I just don't know. I'm sure someone's done something on that. Okay, other questions? All right. I believe I have this in the key terms, the polygraph test, also known as the lie detector test. The polygraph test I won't say too much about, but essentially what it measures is sympathetic nervous system activation. Remember that sympathetic is fight or flight, right? Kind of that fear reaction or anxious reaction. So it's basically measuring how nervous you are when you answer certain questions, which has some relationship to lying, so it's more accurate than chance, but as I'm sure most of you know, not yet accurate enough to use in a court of law. One big problem with lie detectors is they don't work on psychopaths. Psychopaths do not get nervous when they lie. In fact, they rarely get nervous ever. That's one characteristic feature of psychopathy, is it's very hard to condition them with fear or punishment because they have a very underactive sympathetic system. There's a sad story about this. A famous American serial killer, they suspected him early on, brought him in for a lie detector test, and he passed totally fine because none of the questions made him nervous. So, a sad example of that, but that's how the polygraph test works. All right. So next, we're going to talk about Paul Ekman. Very important researcher in emotion. This relates to expressive behaviors, especially facial expressions. So Ekman was educated at a time when, is there no H? The book says no H. Maybe my memory is playing a trick on me. Whatever the case, Paul Ekman was educated at a time when it was very commonly thought that emotions were entirely socially constructed, at least the different facial expressions for different emotions. So in the video we're going to watch, we'll see him talk about this. Someone named Margaret Mead, who's a very influential anthropologist at the time, and that's basically what she argued. Emotional facial expressions are kind of like thumbs up, thumbs down. We just made that up. Different cultures don't have that, and her view is that facial expressions are basically like that. So Ekman decided to test this. He went into the highlands of Papua New Guinea, where there was almost no contact with the outside world. They were still hunter-gatherers. They had been living the same way for tens of thousands of years, and decided to test whether they showed the same facial expressions as we do. And rather than give away the punchline, I will show a video of Ekman describing the study. Okay, I'll stop there. So it was a little hard to hear. What he said was, he had a translator, and he would ask them, okay, make the face you would make if you just saw friends you hadn't seen for a long time. And they smile. Or show me the face that you'll make if you're ready to fight someone. And again, exactly the same as you would find here. Yes?
I was gonna ask about how the way that monkeys, like, when they grin, it's actually an aggressive sort of display, but I guess that is sort of similar to the way.
Yeah, is it I thought it was like, this is based on The Office, Dwight Schrute. Doesn't he say like grinning is like a submission sign or something? I know they do bare their teeth when they're angry, which is similar to what we do, right? If we're mad, like we show our teeth. It's kind of a leftover of that past, even though we tend not to bite people when we fight. Not usually. Now, to be more specific, Ekman in these studies found that there were 6 emotions for which the facial expressions appear to be universal. And those are happy, sad, angry, disgusted, surprised, and afraid. So the facial expressions that you would make in response to, or to show these emotions appear, at least according to Ekman, to be culturally universal. Now, there are some caveats to this, but they've asked me to leave 15 minutes. That's what they recommend for this. So I'll stop there with Ekman. We'll start next class with display rules, finish up the chapter, then we'll do the game. So what I'm going to ask is please stay behind and do the survey if you've not done so already. Now, it's not required, but it is strongly encouraged. But just wait for me to leave because I'm not supposed to be here.